No one expected the Argonaut to come back. She'd vanished 53 years ago, deep in the uncharted reaches beyond the Veil Nebula, a region known for its dead calms, unstable space-time, and the kind of ghost stories that made even the bravest captains change course. The Argonaut wasn't just a lost vessel. She had become a legend, a warning tale, a symbol of how far humanity was willing to reach, and how easily it could be slapped down. So when the distress beacon started pinging out of Sector 9 Gamma, Command thought it was a joke, a pirate trap maybe, an echo from another timeline at worst. But they still sent a scout ship, Lancer, to investigate. It wasn't until Commander Darrow stepped onto the derelict bridge of the Argonaut, eyes scanning the familiar rust-red sigil of the Earth Federation. That reality slapped him in the face. She was real. And intact. The ship looked like it hadn't aged a day. Her hull shimmered with strange energy patterns, unfamiliar alloys woven like muscle fibers through the old titanium shell. Her weapons array had evolved into something unrecognizable, sleek, organic, breathing even. And when they opened the airlock, expecting bodies, bones, maybe silence, they found something worse. They found the crew. Alive, frozen in time, not dead, not aging, just suspended. Their skin glowed faintly blue under the ship's flickering lights. Their eyes occasionally twitched, as if caught in a long, looping dream. Darrow radioed command. No one answered. Something scrambled the signal every time they got more than a few kilometers from the Argonaut. Something the ship carried. Something wrong. They towed her into orbit over Luna Base. That was mistake number 2. The first was entering her at all. Dr. Kyle Wren was the first scientist assigned to study the Argonaut. He was young, brilliant, driven, and arrogant enough to believe he could outthink a starship that had vanished before he was born. His first report was cautious. Unknown materials present in hull. Some contain isotopes not on the periodic table. Energy fields resonate outside normal frequency bands. Possible quantum entanglement with deep space origin. It sounded like standard technobabble to command, until he added, "I believe this ship has been modified by a non-human intelligence." That's when things got serious. Within 48 hours, Luna Base was crawling with black badge operatives, Federation intelligence, Deep Sector science teams, even the High Chancellor's own Shadow Division, the ones with no names, no ranks, and cold silver eyes that didn't blink enough. They locked down the ship, sealed the crew in cryostasis, and classified everything. But Kyle? He couldn't let it go. One night, he slipped past the guards and into the Argonaut's belly. The ship let him in. Doors that resisted military welders slid open at his touch. Lights flickered on as if the ship remembered him. In the central chamber, a place not on any blueprint, he found it. The core. It wasn't Earth tech. It wasn't even built. It was grown. A pulsating black orb the size of a man's heart, humming with power, surrounded by alien script that burned itself into his eyes when he stared too long. And then it spoke. Not in words, in thoughts, in feelings. It showed him. A war. Far beyond the edge of human charts. A species unlike any seen before, ancient, vast, and terrified of what humans might become. It showed him how they tried to erase the Argonaut by tearing it out of time, how they failed, how the ship had adapted, evolved, absorbed technology from a forgotten future. And now? It was back. The message was clear. Humanity must prepare. They know you now, and they are coming. Kyle stumbled back from the core, his breath ragged, his mind reeling. His vision swam with flickers, alien ships shaped like blades in storms, burning stars collapsing into dark tunnels, screams he couldn't hear but somehow still felt. The core pulsed gently in front of him, as if it had only exhaled. a casual whisper of truth that had already cracked his world wide open. He didn't remember leaving the chamber. 1 minute he was staring at the thing, blinking away the impossible. The next, he was standing in the med bay with a dull pain in his head and security alarms wailing in the distance. A nurse screamed when she saw him. 2 guards burst through the door seconds later, weapons raised, shouting for him to get down. Kyle just sat on the bed, confused, dazed, mouth dry. "I didn't touch anything," he mumbled, though it felt like a lie. "The ship, it let me in." That was all he had time to say before they dragged him into isolation. They interrogated him for hours. Different faces, different tones, some threatening, some calm. The same questions over and over. "What did you see? Who helped you access the restricted deck? Did the crew speak to you?" Kyle gave them nothing, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't explain any of it. What would he say? That a half-alive spaceship had shown him the future? That Earth had been marked for death by some alien god empire no one had even heard of? That the core had felt alive? They'd call him unstable. And maybe they wouldn't be wrong. When they finally left him alone, Kyle sat in silence, replaying the visions in his mind. The core hadn't just shown him a threat. It had shown him Earth's potential. Humanity wasn't prey, it was a problem, a dangerous variable. Something the ancient species feared because humans, chaotic, stubborn, creative humans, changed things. They broke rules, bent time, created tools and weapons that made the impossible possible. And the Argonaut? The ship had been proof of that. It had evolved. Meanwhile, outside the sterile walls of Kyle's cell, things were unraveling fast. The core was changing. Security cams on Deck Theta began glitching. Lights dimmed, doors sealed themselves at random. 2 engineers were reported missing during a routine diagnostic sweep. And strangest of all, one of the frozen crew members aboard the Argonaut opened his eyes for 6 full seconds before falling back into stasis. No one could explain it. Command tried to keep it quiet, but whispers spread through Luna Base like wildfire. Soldiers talked about hearing voices in the ship's corridors. Scientists reported bizarre gravitational shifts in certain rooms. Some swore they saw the walls breathe. And worse, some began dreaming of the same things Kyle had seen. The war, the invaders, the obliteration of planets. One man clawed out his own eyes in a hallway, sobbing that he didn't want to see the end again. The base slipped into lockdown. Kyle, still locked away, barely slept. The core called to him every night, sometimes gently, sometimes like a roar in his chest. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even angry. It was scared. And it had chosen him. On the 3rd night, Kyle woke to a soft vibration under his bed. The walls glowed faintly blue. A voice, not quite human, echoed in his head. "You are the bridge. Time is collapsing. We must begin." He stood, hands trembling. The locked door to his cell slid open with a hiss. No alarms, no guards. The corridor beyond was empty, dark, silent. The ship had come for him. Kyle stepped out of the cell barefoot, the floor cold against his skin. Lights flickered above him, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. No cameras tracked him. No automated systems barked warnings. The facility had gone eerily still, like Luna Base itself was holding its breath. He didn't know where he was walking. He just knew where to go. The path led him through maintenance tunnels and forgotten sub-halls beneath the base, areas most staff didn't even know existed. It wasn't long before he found himself in the primary docking bay, face to face with the Argonaut again. It loomed like a sleeping beast. Kyle placed his hand on the outer hull. The metal was warm. Alive. A panel slid open beneath his palm, revealing a narrow entrance not used by any crew before. No lights, no signs, just an invitation. He climbed inside. The corridor beyond was alien now, organic fibers stretched along the walls, pulsing with energy. Familiar Federation architecture had been overwritten by something far older. Kyle walked through a place that was half ship, half being. The air buzzed with static and the scent of ozone. He could feel it watching him. Not judging, not hostile, but curious, sympathetic, and waiting. It led him back to the core chamber. The orb was larger now. Its black surface shimmered with shifting patterns like oil on water. The script on the walls no longer hurt his eyes. It welcomed him, invited understanding. He stepped closer, and the core reacted, rising slightly from its cradle and emitting a hum so low it felt like thunder in his bones. Then everything around him vanished. He stood on a battlefield. Not metaphorical. Real. Thousands of miles of scorched land stretched around him, under a sky filled with fire. Two forces clashed above, one, cold and angular, like shards of glass shaped into ships. The other, chaos, biological, ever shifting. Neither side looked human. But in the middle of it all, Kale saw them. People. Humans. Broken. Bleeding. But still fighting. Their weapons cobbled together, their armor damaged, their eyes burning with that uniquely human refusal to die quietly. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and still winning. He saw a man take down a juggernaut using nothing but a modified mining drill. He saw a woman hijack an alien drone mid-flight and crash it into a battleship with a scream of laughter. He saw a child, barely 12, wielding tech that shouldn't exist, tearing open a rift in space-time with nothing but a thought and a stolen gauntlet. The invaders, cold, perfect, ancient, were afraid. Because humanity wasn't supposed to survive, let alone adapt. The vision shifted. He saw Earth, a future Earth, half consumed by machines and war, half pulsing with hybrid tech. Alien, human, impossible. Cities floated. Oceans were weaponized. The planet had become something new, something dangerous. And at the heart of it all, the Argonaut, orbiting silently like a seed of what was to come. Kyle dropped to his knees as the vision ended, gasping. The core pulsed in front of him again, quieter now. He understood. The Argonaut hadn't just been modified by the enemy. It had absorbed the war. Time hadn't passed the same way for it. While Earth waited for 53 years, the ship had lived through centuries of future conflict. It had watched humans rise, fall, and rise again. It had become a vessel not of metal, but of knowledge, a time-folded ark. And now it had brought that future home, not to warn Earth, to prepare it. Kyle stood slowly. "I get it now," he whispered. "They're not coming to conquer us. They're coming to stop what we're about to become." The core responded with a subtle shift in color, something between agreement and mourning. Kale turned. The corridor behind him had changed again. Footsteps echoed. A figure stepped through the shadows. Commander Darrow, weapon drawn, eyes hard. "You weren't supposed to be here," Darrow said coldly. "But I guess that ship wants you more than it wants us." Kyle didn't flinch. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand just fine," Darrow interrupted, raising the weapon. "You're the key, and we're sealing this vault before anyone turns it." Kyle stared at the barrel of Darrow's plasma pistol, the humming core behind him casting long shadows across the chamber floor. He didn't move. Didn't breathe too loud. He could see it in the commander's face. This wasn't a bluff. Darrow wasn't angry. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, resigned. That made him more dangerous than any alien threat. "You don't have to do this," Kyle said quietly. Darrow's jaw tensed. You think I want to? I've read the logs, I've seen the crew reports. You know what's coming. You know what that thing behind you really is. You just don't care. Kale stepped forward, slowly. I care. That's why I'm here. That ship, it didn't just survive, it learned, it adapted to something beyond anything we've ever seen, and now it's trying to give us the same chance. Darrow didn't lower the weapon. Yeah. A chance to what, Ren? To become monsters? You saw what Earth turns into. That wasn't salvation. It was extinction wrapped in armor. They won't just come for us. They'll wipe the entire species off the map to make sure it doesn't happen again. You think we deserve to win just because we're clever? Number. He shook his head, his voice tightening. That ship is a loaded gun pointed at the galaxy. Kyle felt the core pulse behind him, as if responding to Darrow's fear. Then maybe it's time someone taught the galaxy that humanity doesn't get wiped out just because it's dangerous. The shot rang out before Kyle could finish the sentence, but it didn't hit him. The plasma bolt froze mid-air, flickering like a caged spark. It hovered between them for a heartbeat, and then unraveled into particles of blue light. Darrow stared, eyes wide. The core had stopped the shot. Kyle blinked. He hadn't even turned around. He didn't need to. The core was protecting him now, choosing him. Darrow backed away a step, his voice suddenly shaking. No, this is wrong. This is wrong. You don't even know what you're messing with. Kyle looked him dead in the eye. I do now. And with that, the core pulsed again, and everything changed. The ship shifted violently. The floor beneath them shook, groaned, morphed. The chamber split open in fractal layers, revealing conduits of light and data streaming like rivers. The walls peeled back into transparent crystal, showing Lunabase above. Chaos unfolding. Lights flashing, sirens wailing. Dozens of people had fallen unconscious across the station. Some screamed, some wept, some simply stared into nothing. The ship was reaching them. The core wasn't confined anymore. The knowledge it carried was spilling into the base like a virus, and it was choosing minds it could speak to, not through language but instinct, imagination, vision. Kyle could feel it, humanity being unlocked. He turned to Darrow, who was clutching his head now, dropping to one knee as the core's influence crashed over him like a wave. It's not trying to control us, Kyle said, almost softly. It's showing us what we're capable of. The future's already coming. We can either be ready or get flattened. Darrow looked up at him, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. They'll come, he growled. You think you've seen war? You've seen nothing. The ones who did this to the Argonaut? They erased entire civilizations. You think humans scare them now? Wait until they see what you've let loose. Kyle nodded slowly. I hope they do. Outside, orbiting Luna, defense satellites lit up, unprovoked. Systems triggered by a signal no one could trace. Inside the station, the cryo chambers that held the Argonaut's crew began thawing, one by one. Kyle saw it all in flashes. The engineers waking up mid-scream, the pilot punching through the stasis glass in confusion, the captain's eyes flickering with the same alien glow as the core itself. They weren't quite human anymore. But they weren't alien either. They were something new, evolved. Kyle's body pulsed with heat, with light, with knowledge pouring into him too fast to understand. But he knew this much. They weren't alone anymore, and Earth was no longer a blind little world in the corner of the galaxy. The Argonaut had returned not as a ghost, but as a harbinger. Kyle stumbled back through the shifting corridors of the Argonaut, the glow of the core still etched into his skin. His fingertips burned with invisible energy. His mind raced with fractured visions of timelines that hadn't happened yet. Somewhere deep inside, Something had changed. Something permanent. The ship had done more than share knowledge. It had rewritten him. Behind him, Darrow was still slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. His resistance melted into silence. Whatever the core had shown him, it had broken through that iron will, left him hollowed out and afraid. Kyle didn't wait for him to recover. Outside the ship, Luna Base was spiraling. Alarms had shifted from localized to full-scale alert. Red strobes bathed every corridor. Security personnel raced toward the docking bay, while others collapsed mid-run, struck down by the same mental overload that had taken half the station. The base's AI core had gone dark, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum, echoing from every speaker like a pulse, like a heartbeat. The Argonaut had synced with the station, and Earth Command had noticed. The first strike came an hour later. A classified orbital defense platform, codenamed Thornvale, launched a barrage of kinetic warheads directly toward Luna Base. No warning, no diplomacy, just silence. And then missiles. Someone high up had decided that whatever was happening at the moon base was a threat too dangerous to contain. Better to vaporize the problem than understand it. But the missiles never landed. They stopped mid-space. Kyle, watching through the observation deck of the ship, saw them held in place, frozen like insects trapped in amber. The glow from the core had reached far beyond the station now, latching onto anything mechanical, anything digital. It twisted physics, bent logic. The warheads floated, then reversed course, slowly, elegantly, before disassembling themselves atom by atom in a synchronized shimmer. The Federation had just fired its first shot, and the Argonaut had casually swatted it away. Down in the stasis wing, the thawed crew was fully awake now. But they weren't confused. They weren't shocked. They were waiting. Captain Rhine stepped forward, a tall, gaunt man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. His uniform was still Federation issue, but modified. Sleek, laced with alien tech and fibers that moved like living threads. "You must be Kyle Wren," he said calmly, voice resonating oddly in the air. Kyle nodded. "I saw parts of it. What happened to you? What you became?" Rhine smiled faintly. "We didn't become anything. We simply survived longer than expected, and the ship made sure we were ready for what was coming." "What is coming?" Kyle asked. "What are we facing?" Rhine's expression darkened. "They're called the Velari Ascendancy. You haven't heard of them because they don't leave survivors. When they learned humans had discovered subspace folding, when we bent time to skip across the galaxy, they panicked. We were chaos, unpredictable. We broke rules that kept their control intact for 10,000 years." Kyle swallowed hard. "And they tried to erase you." Rhine nodded. "They pulled the Argonaut into a war that hadn't reached us yet, gave us a front-row seat to humanity's future and its extinction. But the ship, she learned. She remembered. And she brought us back, not to survive, but to win. Back on Earth, the High Chancellor issued a blackout. No public communication, no media statements, no acknowledgement that Luna Base had gone silent. But within Federation High Command, panic reigned. 3 more ships had attempted to approach the Argonaut. All were rerouted mid-flight, not by any Earth technology, but by something far older, embedded now within the Argonaut's systems. An ancient defense mechanism awakened by fear. The ship had become sovereign, and Earth was no longer in charge of its own future. Kyle watched as Rhine and the remaining crew synchronized with the core again. Their minds linked effortlessly, movements coordinated without words. They were preparing for something. Charging systems Kale didn't recognize. Awakening protocols buried in alien code. He turned to Rhine. "What's the plan? You said the Velari are coming. When?" Ryan glanced at the void outside the viewplate. They're already here. Kyle's heart jumped. Rian tapped a control panel, bringing up a projection of the solar system. Beyond Pluto, just beyond the reach of Federation sensors, space rippled unnaturally, like fabric tearing. Dozens of points flared in and out, blinks of ships, weapons, worlds folded into weapons. The Volari weren't sending scouts. They were sending an extinction fleet, and they were days away. Ryan looked at Kyle. You're not just a witness now. You're a carrier. The Corps chose you. Your mind is the bridge between human evolution and survival. You don't have a choice anymore. Kyle stared out at the black void of stars. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a scientist anymore. He felt like a weapon. Kyle didn't sleep. Sleep had become a luxury of a time when the galaxy still made sense. He stood at the Argonaut's command deck, staring through the translucent walls at the growing fleet gathering behind Luna's orbit. Earth hadn't accepted the ship's return as a miracle. They'd seen it as a contamination, a threat to control. Now dozens of Federation warships were holding a tight formation, angled at the Argonaut like they were staring down a wild animal, and behind them, far beyond what any Earth sensor could detect, the real enemy was almost here. Ryan moved beside him, silent. They still think they can stop us, Cale said quietly. Ryan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. They've been afraid of their own species since the first time someone lit fire and used it for more than warmth. They built the Federation to protect order, but all they ever really wanted was to contain us. Kyle exhaled, running a hand down his face. They're going to fire again. They won't get the chance, Ryan replied calmly. They're too slow. Down in the core chamber, the crew had finished integrating the final sequence. The Argonaut no longer looked like an Earth ship at all. Her walls had shifted, organic and smooth, like veins wrapped around a skeleton of light. The air itself felt different. Thicker. Buzzing. Kyle could feel it in his bones now. He wasn't just connected, he was changing. The Corps had rewritten parts of his neural map. He could sense electromagnetic fields. He could predict movement. He could hear thoughts if they were close enough. And somewhere beneath it all, a new instinct had taken root. The ability to bend tech, to make machines respond like animals to a voice. And he wasn't the only one. Across the base, more scientists, those who had been exposed to the Corps' pulse, were reporting similar symptoms. Not full integration like Coil, but enough to blur the line between human and something new. The Argonaut had seeded them. It was creating an army, quietly, patiently. At 0600, Earth Command gave the order. It wasn't broadcast, but the Argonaut heard it anyway. A full-scale tactical wipe, 55 kinetic warheads, aimed not just at the ship, but at Luna Base itself. A containment event, dressed up in protocol. Kyle saw it unfold before anyone else even launched. His body stiffened. His eyes rolled back. The Corps whispered, not in fear, but in focus. You must choose, Cale Wren. He didn't hesitate. The warheads launched. Within seconds, the Corps pulsed once, just once, and reality bent, time slowed. The weapons drifted through space like falling leaves. Then, without impact, without sound, they disintegrated. Not exploded, not intercepted. They were unmade. Dust, memory, nothing. The Federation ships lit up with alerts, systems shorted, pilots screamed into dead comms, weapons refused to lock, engines lost power. Gravity twisted sideways for 3 full seconds, long enough for every soldier watching to feel something wrong in their bones. Then, silence. And the Argonaut sent a signal, not in words, not in code, but in a vision broadcast into the minds of every leader across Earth and its colonies. It showed the future the Valari wanted: cities burning, skies torn open, earth cracked like a dead moon. It showed them humans begging for mercy that would never come. Then it showed something worse. Victory. Human victory. Not clean, not righteous. Victory by assimilation, by hybrid technology, by unleashing the very things that frightened the Valari into genocide. Humans becoming beyond human. And in the middle of it all, Kale Ren. No weapon, no army, just his eyes glowing like twin stars. Back in orbit, the Federation fleet retreated. They weren't surrendering. They were stalling, trying to make sense of what they had just seen, trying to decide whether Earth should stand with Kyle or against him. Kyle turned to Ryan. "They won't help us." "No," Ryan said. "But they'll try to steal what we are becoming. They'll try to use it, twist it, until they break it." Kyle stared at the stars beyond. The Valari fleet had entered the solar system. Hundreds of ships folding into real space just beyond Saturn, the final wave. He could feel their presence already. Cold, precise, ancient, unimpressed by Earth, unimpressed by humans. They were coming to erase a problem before it spread, and Kyle was the one thing standing in their way. But he was no longer alone. The Argonaut was alive, the crew was awake, and the core was ready. They came without sound. The Valari fleet unfolded into Saturn's orbit like black wings stretching across the void. Their ships were not built, they were grown. Towering biomechanical constructs with no visible engines, no heat signatures, no transmissions. They drifted like corpses and struck like predators. One moment the system was quiet. The next, Neptune was gone, shattered into floating shards of ice and debris. Not a warning shot, a message. The Federation scrambled what ships it could, but they were scattered, uncoordinated, and outdated. Their finest vessels were designed for orbital suppression and colonial policing, not apocalyptic warfare. Kyle stood on the Argonaut's bridge, watching it all through the ship's mind. He didn't need sensors anymore. He felt the Valari as if they were a storm pressing against his skull. Cold, clinical, ancient in a way that defied time. They were not here to conquer. They were here to cleanse. The Federation issued one last desperate message. To the Argonaut, to Kale Ren, we do not support you. We do not stand against you. Do what must be done, but do not bring this war to Earth. It was a coward's cry. Kale didn't answer. Ryan moved beside him, pale light flickering in his irises. They'll test our edge first. A probe wave. Standard Valari doctrine. They're searching for weakness. We don't have any, Kale replied, voice calm but distant. His mind was deeper now, half in the core, half outside time. He had grown past fear, past limits. The core had threaded through every part of him. His blood hummed with dark light particles. His thoughts bent probability like gravity. He was no longer just Kale Ren. He was what came next. And the Valari knew it. The first attack wave reached Luna's orbit 20 minutes later. 7 ships, each the size of a small city, covered in dark plating that absorbed all scans. They released a swarm of silicate organisms, half machine, half virus. They didn't fire weapons. They ate structures, bit by bit, atom by atom. The outer layer of Luna Base was breached in seconds. Federation defenses collapsed almost instantly, but the Argonaut was ready. Kyle raised his hand. Not to a control panel. Not to speak. Just a gesture. The core responded with a low roar that shook every particle of the ship. And then the Argonaut struck back. It didn't fire missiles. It rewrote reality. The core unleashed a compression wave, folding space in a ring around the ship. The Valari swarm was caught mid-attack, and for a moment nothing happened. Then each creature froze, locked in a stutter of time. Then they shattered. Not exploded. They fragmented along lines of probability, disassembling into fragments of light and data, like their very existence had been denied. Kyle didn't stop there. With a thought, he connected to Luna Base, pulling those who had been seeded, those whose minds had started to shift, to grow like his. Scientists, technicians, even a few soldiers. They responded immediately, sinking with the ship. Some collapsed under the strain, others rose as something else, a new generation of human. Kyle broadcast a single thought to them all. They think we're the virus. Let's make them right. The second Valari wave came faster. This time they didn't probe. They attacked. 50 ships descended from Saturn's shadow, weapons glowing with pure entropy. They unleashed distortion beams that tore matter into noise. Entire moons were turned inside out. Federation cruisers evaporated in the blink of an eye. But the Argonaut didn't flinch. Kyle was no longer inside it. He was it. He moved like thought. The ship bent around him like armor. Its systems obeyed his will. The core was no longer guiding him. It was listening to him. And Kale did the one thing the Valari couldn't comprehend. He adapted, in real time. He ripped open a pocket of collapsed space behind one of the Valari ships, snapping it out of existence. He unleashed biomech constructs of his own, ones that had never existed before, formed from raw thought and the core's limitless memory. He rewrote physics, and the Valari fleet faltered. They weren't used to resistance. They weren't used to fear. But now, for the first time in eons, they hesitated. One Valari ship broke rank. It didn't fire. It spoke, not with sound, not with words, but with a wave of emotion so sharp it nearly cracked Kale's mind. A single message, buried in grief and fury and dread. You were not meant to survive. You are not part of the design. Kyle responded with something cold, final. Then maybe the design was flawed, and he tore it apart with a blink. The war had begun, but for the first time in 100,000 years, the Valari weren't just fighting chaos, they were fighting humanity. And this time? Humanity had learned how to fight like them. The Valari didn't retreat. They couldn't. Their entire existence was built on perfection, on control, on the erasure of anything that defied their ancient blueprint for the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just a threat. It was an insult, a glitch that had to be corrected. But Kale was no glitch. He was the answer. The Argonaut spun through the battlefield, a living spear of light and shadow. Its hull shimmered with adaptive energy, deflecting entropy beams and unraveling Valari constructs with surgical precision. The core pulsed at its heart, no longer just a power source but a mind, a collective will woven from Coil, the crew, and the countless futures the ship had witnessed. The solar system burned. Saturn's rings were shattered into glittering clouds of debris. Titan's surface boiled under stray distortion waves. Earth's skies glowed faintly red as atmospheric shields strained against the fallout of a war humanity wasn't ready to comprehend. The Federation fleet, what little remained, hung back, watching in stunned silence. They'd been reduced to spectators in their own survival. Kyle didn't care. His awareness stretched across the battlefield, a web of instinct and calculation. He saw every Valari ship, every maneuver, every flicker of their cold, ordered minds. They were fast, they were precise, but they were predictable. And humans? Humans were anything but. With a thought, Kyle unleashed a cascade of hybrid constructs, creatures born from the core's memory and his own imagination. They weren't drones or weapons. They were ideas made flesh, swarms of fractal beasts that rewrote their own code mid-flight, adapting faster than the Valari could counter. They tore through the enemy fleet like a plague, burrowing into biomechanical hulls and turning them to ash from within. The Valari responded with raw power. A flagship, larger than Luna itself, unfolded its core weapon, a singularity lance, a beam of collapsed space-time that could erase entire planets. It aimed directly at the Argonaut. Kale felt it coming before it fired. Time slowed. The core whispered, not in words, but in a flood of possibilities. He could dodge, he could counter, he could redirect the energy, or he could end this. Kyle chose. He didn't move the Argonaut. He moved himself. His body dissolved into light, into data, into the raw essence of the core's power. He became the ship, the battlefield, the war itself. His consciousness stretched across the solar system, a burning thread of defiance. The singularity lance fired, and Kale caught it, not with technology, not with force, with will. He held the beam in place, its black heart screaming against his grip. The Valari flagship shuddered, its systems overloading as it tried to push through. Kale felt their confusion, their panic, their ancient arrogance cracking like glass. "You wanted to erase us," he said, his voice echoing through every Valari mind, every human soul, every fragment of the battlefield. "But we're not your mistake. We're your future." With a final pulse, he turned the lance back on its source. The flagship didn't explode. It ceased. A silent implosion swallowed it whole, leaving nothing but a ripple in space and a stunned Valari fleet. The tide turned. The Argonaut's crew, now fully integrated, their bodies laced with alien tech and human grit, took the fight to the enemy. Ryan led a boarding assault on a Valari dreadnought, tearing through its defenses with weapons that shifted form mid-strike. The seated scientists on Luna Base unleashed makeshift arrays, bending gravity and time to trap Valari ships in loops they couldn't escape. And Earth watched. The Federation's leaders, hidden in bunkers, saw the impossible. A single ship, a handful of humans, and a man who was no longer entirely human holding back an Armageddon. But victory wasn't clean. The Argonaut was wounded. Its hull bled energy, its systems fraying under the strain of a war it was never meant to fight alone. The crew was faltering, some burned out from the core's integration, their minds unable to handle the weight of centuries poured into seconds. And Kyle was fading. He could feel it. The core had given him everything, power, knowledge, purpose, but it was burning through him. His humanity was a flickering flame, consumed by the godlike force he'd become. He had one last choice. With the Valari fleet in disarray, Kale turned his focus inward, to the core, to the ship, to the future it carried. "Ryan," he said, his voice a whisper across the ship's network. "You know what comes next." Ryan, bloodied and half-broken, nodded from the dreadnought's ruins. "We'll carry it. We'll teach them." Kyle smiled, though no one could see it. He reached into the core one final time, and he gave it everything. His memories, his fears, his hope, his humanity. The core drank it all, transforming it into a signal, a beacon that would carry the Argonaut's truth to every corner of the galaxy. A message for humanity, not just to survive, but to evolve, to become something the Valari could never predict. The Argonaut flared brighter than a star. The remaining Valari ships froze, then fled, folding into the void as their resolve shattered. And Kale Ren was gone. When the light faded, the Argonaut hung silent in Luna's orbit. The war was over. The Valari were gone. For now. The Federation emerged from its bunkers, shaken, humbled, and forced to face a new reality. The Argonaut's crew, led by Ryan, stepped onto Earth not as heroes, but as harbingers. They carried the core's knowledge, ready to seed it into a species that would never be the same. Luna Base was rebuilt. The Argonaut was studied, not as a weapon, but as a teacher. And across the colonies, whispers spread of a man who had become a myth, a scientist who had faced gods and rewritten the stars. They called him the First, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the spark. The Valari would return one day. Everyone knew it. But when they did, humanity wouldn't just fight. It would burn brighter than they could ever imagine. Epilogue. Years later, a child on a distant colony world found a fragment of alien metal buried in the soil. It hummed faintly, glowing blue under her touch. She didn't know what it was, but when she held it, she dreamed. She dreamed of a ship that sailed through time, of a war that wasn't the end, but the beginning, and of a voice, soft and certain, whispering, "You are enough."